Our past stories are truly the windows to understanding our present and, in some cases, even our future. And no matter how much we might try to run from or avoid this, we're all about one breakthrough or breakdown away from facing them head on. But what do I know? Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the But What Do I Know podcast. I'm your host, Chidinma, and I just want to welcome you all to another episode. Listen, it is Wednesday. This is our third episode of our 2025 season, and we're showing up. We're consistent. We're here, and I'm feeling real good. I'm feeling really good. I had, a good weekend. I feel like March for me is that month that things are sort of ramping up in terms of work and enjoyment, and I'm just prepping myself for April. I'm getting myself organized. At the same time, also, booking and letting the girlies know what our birthday celebrations are going to be next month and booking some future trips. Because, for y'all that tuned into our first episode, that was on my list. We're taking trips this year. Okay, I deserve. So I've been doing really good, and I've also just been enjoying the reception to our first 2 episodes of the season, the reception to our girls' night in that we had with our Discord girlies. So I'm doing good, y'all. I'm doing so good, and I hope that y'all had a good past week as well. So with that being said, before we go any further, please make sure that you are subscribed on whatever streaming platform it is that you use to listen to this podcast, whether it be Apple, Spotify, any streaming platform. Just make sure that you are subscribed, that you have notifications turned on so that you don't miss an episode. If you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure that you also have rated us, 5 stars. And if you have time, leave us a nice review. Just say what you're enjoying about the podcast. Share it with a girly, share it with a girly you feel like, could really use this content. Would love to hear, the conversations that we have on this platform. So grateful. It is not taken for granted how much y'all continue to, like, share, and interact. So please continue to do that. Socials, Instagram is at BWDIK Podcast. Information is in this episode description. YouTube for the visual girlies. We're there. We're consistent. That's also in this episode description. Discord, okay? For those that have been, messaging, asking, what's going to be happening? What's actually going on down there? Well, link is in this episode description. Use a link and find out how we get down, okay? All right, but I believe that's all. I think we can go ahead and get right into our clue in segment for this episode. All right, so y'all, for this week, I have just 2 things that I want y'all to clue into before we go ahead and get into our main segment conversation. The first is a TV show that's returning, and the second is a book. Okay, so the first is Harlem. Harlem season 3 is back, and I am not quite caught up, but I still need y'all to clue in because I need y'all to watch it with me, okay? I'm on episode 1, but I've watched season 1 and season 2, and I've loved those seasons, and so I'm really excited for season 3. I'm excited to find out who it was that was actually pregnant in the friend group, because if you remember, they left us on a bit of a cliffhanger where they were all sitting together. They were waiting, they were waiting for the test. They were waiting to figure out who it was. So I'm interested to know who that is. Of course, Camille and Ian, do they get back together? Do they not? So far from the trailer and the scenes I'm watching in episode 1, it's not given that. I don't know. I'm actually really curious to see how this story gets, woven, to see if they do end up together. And then I'm interested in all the friend stories. I want to know what's happening with all the girlies, but especially Quinn, because I think her character saw so much growth in season 2, where we really got to understand her mental health situation. And I think she also just got tired of the facade that she was putting up. And I'm hoping that she continues to lean into her growth, her self-care. I really want to see Quinn's character take care of herself. And, if it's in the cards for her this season, then find a lover and a partner that doesn't awaken all the angst and the questioning and the stress that she tends to have when she gets into, any type of romantic situationship, casual dating, actual relationship. That girl gets anxious. So I'm really looking forward to Harlem. Discord girlies, should we do a watch party? Because I'm down. I'm so down to do a Harlem watch party. We could probably watch, maybe not the full season together, but we could watch the last couple of episodes. So let me know if you're in the Discord. Let's talk. I'm so down. Let's talk about it. All right. And the second I said is a book, and this book is called Of My Own Making by Daria Burke. It's a memoir, and it is a book that details the author's, just journey and reflections on a very tumultuous childhood trauma, the work that she did and is still doing to get to a place of, of healing and of understanding all that she went through, even amidst having like crazy success and doing amazing things, So I'm not done the book. I'm making my way through, but I'm really enjoying it so far. So if that is your thing, definitely go ahead and check it out. This is actually Daria's first book, and it comes out later this month on the 22nd, but I was able to get an advance copy, okay, because your girl is that important. But I was able to get an advance copy from Daria's PR team that reached out. And, sometimes when I get PR teams that reach out to me, the emails don't be making sense, okay? I can tell that you didn't listen to the actual podcast content, or else you wouldn't have reached out to talk to me about why Brian should come on the podcast to talk about cryptocurrency, okay? But this made sense, and as I was reading the book, I just found myself asking so many questions, and I was like, whoa, okay, it's a dope book, and I also want to have Daria on the podcast. So I love the book. It is very raw, it's honest, and it kind of left me not feeling pity for her, but a sense of just empathy and almost relief too that she has gone through, this sort of breakthrough and is doing more additional work and is figuring out more tools to kind of add to her toolkit for her own healing. So amazing book. If you relate or you want to hear about her story, definitely go ahead and check out Of My Own Making. Like I said, it comes out on April 22nd, but the link to check out the book is in this episode description. And with that being said, we're going to go ahead and get into our main segment conversation, because guess what? We are actually going to hear from Daria herself. And I'm super, super, super excited. She's done such amazing things. And so to have her team reach out and want to sort of include us in her, virtual book tour and talk as she sort of shares this book with the world, it's amazing. I'm glad that, they reached out. It's an honor. So we're going to go ahead and chat with Daria. Let's get into it. All right, y'all. So for our main conversation for this episode, I'm so excited because we are going to be getting into our guest's childhood journey. When we talk about doing the work to overcome childhood trauma, what it actually means to do the work, what her work looked like. We're going to be getting into some, mother-daughter dynamics and healing motherhood wounds, which I'm super grateful for, because I think oftentimes we hyper-focus on fatherhood wounds and those dynamics. So I'm really excited to get into this. And we're going to be talking about all this, with the context of her book that y'all will be able to get your hands on soon in a couple of weeks, April 22nd, Of My Own Making. So listeners, today we have with us Daria Burke. Daria is she has done a lot of things, y'all. I had to summarize here for her bio, but Daria is an award-winning marketing executive, speaker, and now an author with this upcoming book. Her work has been recognized by lots of publications, including Vogue, The Cut, and Nylon Magazine. She's also been featured on several podcasts and publications like The Popular Therapy for Black Girls, Essence Magazine, The Root, and now she is on the But What Do I Know podcast. So welcome, Daria. I'm so excited to have you. From once we made the connection through your PR, I, saw the proposal. I was like, this works. Like sometimes I get pitches and they don't often work, but this works. And I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm grateful too. And since you mentioned my publicist, a huge shout out to Jackson, who yes. I adore and love working with. And yeah, we're so glad to have found the show, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, no worries. So when I was sort of drafting my notes for this conversation, I thought about, where would be a good place to start? Where do I want to start with this conversation? Because there's so much. And as I make my way through your book, I'm learning so much. And I'm like, oh my God, I need a sticky note here, there. I want to talk about this. But I think a good place for us to start would be, I want to know, just because of how you describe your childhood in the book, I want to know when you realized just how tumultuous your childhood was. And I hope that that's an okay word to use, but I want to know when you actually like sat and realized that.
Yes, it is a very fair word. And I will give, if you don't mind, just a little background for your listeners who may not have the same familiarity with my background for context so that we can all know what tumultuous means. So I grew up in Detroit in the 80s and 90s. Both of my parents suffered from addiction, and they split up when I was 2 years old. So I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad. He was largely absent from our lives. But I became aware over time that he had an addiction as well. But, with my mom, I had a front row seat to it. And, both of her parents, by the time I became aware of it, to start to get into the answer, her parents had passed away, and my mom's the youngest, of 5 kids. Both my grandparents were married prior, and then when they got married, they had my mom. So she's the youngest, the only daughter. And I share that because I think a lot of people immediately go, well, where were your family members, and, where were adults? And I think that's a different conversation. And I think as an adult, I can appreciate the delicate manner, that anybody would be faced with trying to figure out what to do and how to get involved, and if you get involved, and all of those kinds of things. If you're aware that, there's a parent who's neglecting their children. But to sort of get back to it, and so we had a really difficult home life. I was raised in deep poverty. We were, below the poverty level. My mom didn't work. Her addiction was quite debilitating. And oftentimes we didn't have a working telephone. Many times our water or our electricity or our gas got turned off. So, it was tumultuous and not always safe as a result of the problems that she faced and the kinds of people that were in her life and therefore around us. And so my awareness of it, I think my earliest memory of her addiction was when I was maybe about 7. I think that I would probably say that I became more clear that things were tumultuous, maybe 8 or 9. And the few things kind of allowed that information to become clear. I think one, it was very clear that my mom was not like other moms, and so whether it was hanging out with our friends like going to a friend's house after school and having snacks, or just the presence of parents and their concern about things like homework and, things that now seem so normal that weren't as prevalent in my childhood. And then it sort of matured into realizing I didn't want people over to my house, over to my house. And so, I didn't really have a best friend growing up because that came with a lot of risk. It was very risky to be exposed, to have somebody come over to your house, and you couldn't do a sleepover because they would know that there was no food in the house, or, that we didn't have running water. And I write about this in the book. There were periods of time when our water would get turned off, and my sister and we would go to the neighbor's house next door or to my uncle's house. I had an uncle who actually lived next door to us. We'd go to his house or to the neighbor's house and use their side water faucet, the outdoor faucet for the hose to water the yard. We would fill up these 5-gallon fish pails, like paint buckets, with water, and we'd bring them in and we'd use that for cooking, for bathing, for everything you needed running water for. And so I think it was pretty clear that was not normal, and the inconsistency of it all. And, there were lots of people in and out of our house and in our lives that we saw who were clearly unwell. And there was a lot of, different relationships that my mother was in, that were volatile, I'll just say. And so, yeah, I think it all started to really come together when I was probably 8 or 9. I imagine, and in hindsight, even in writing, there were probably moments of chaos long before that I just don't remember.
Right. Okay. So 8, 9, and then if you could kind of briefly what was your sense of, I guess, awareness and consciousness between then? I'm trying to get to between then and then when you finally decided, I want to write this book, or the ideas started coming together and you thought, you know what, I think it's time for me to put my story in this format. What was that period like? Because it's a long way that you've come, girl. Like,
thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you. I can answer that in a few different ways. I'll try to be brief, but I would say that so much of my early years, my young adulthood was just focused on getting out. And so for me, school was really such an outlet for me. And I was always so clear that I was going to college, and I was always very clear that there was another life that was waiting for me. And so I think, as I got more and more out of survival mode, the farther away, the more distance I had, the more, and I should say, when I became aware that I actually had healing to do, and that there was, that what I had experienced had names, and that, its imprint on me had an effect in the form of complex PTSD, I could then start to imagine a world where I could maybe share my story. But at that time, we're talking about, mid to late 20s. I had just barely started to tell people in my life. I had friends who knew, people I was really close to, but most people had no idea. So it took me a while, I think, to really imagine that I could tell it on as big of a stage as I am now. The first time, though, that I think it really dawned on me that I might, at one day, I didn't know when, but one day tell the story. I was about 30, maybe 31. And I knew that I wasn't ready, but I knew that there might be utility in that, that there may be a reason to share it. And there's a poem titled Why Bother, by Sean Thomas Doherty. And it's a very short poem where he just answers this really simple question by saying, why bother? Because right now there is someone out there with a wound in the exact shape of your words. And I felt that, years before that poem came into my awareness, but it said exactly it. And I felt like it was, I think, a way to offer something to somebody else. I suffered in silence for a really long time, feeling shame and feeling, having this guilt that was really disenfranchised, and being surrounded by people who just didn't understand it. My friends, generally speaking, when you go to a school like Michigan and then you go to a school like NYU, and I was working in New York City at that point, and I'm at these blue chip companies, I wasn't working with people who knew what my background was like. So it wasn't, even the kind of thing that I could really talk to somebody and have them go, oh my God, yeah, right, totally, I understand. And so I wrestled with a lot of that on my own, obviously through therapy, but it was really a very lonely healing journey until I could figure out how to bring people in. So I think also wanting to offer it for anybody who might feel isolated in their grief, or just in the pain of maybe what they didn't get, and that's, I think, my hope. And so now I think I can share it because I feel I have so much distance from it, and I could put into words not just my story, but I could frame it and offer it in a way that hopefully gave people insight into how it might also work in their own lives, and I know you've talked about the stories we tell ourselves, right? And the stories we tell ourselves ultimately become a version of our self narrative, or the stories we tell about ourselves as well. All of that becomes a version of what we come to believe. And so, yeah, just hoping that people can rewrite some version of the story that they might be telling themselves as a result of what they had or didn't have, or what their home life or early life might have looked like.
Yeah, no, a couple of things that you said. it's just so, I absolutely understand when you said, you leave Michigan and you're going to a school like NYU and having to sort of explain that. And I'm sure some people will understand it. But then when, like you said, being at blue chip companies, you're at a point where now you're, maybe, you're post graduation and now you're looking for jobs and you're carrying yourself in a certain way. And it's just a little bit hard for people to make that connection, and some people don't understand it. So I definitely understand that piece too. But I do think that you put in this, in this format of a book, I just think it's so powerful. It also kind of stamps it, like it means that it's here and it'll forever be here, in its totality. Like we get to see, the parts that are tumultuous, that are a little bit scary, but then we also get to see your life as like a living testimony, for example.
Thank you.
And the parts of the good parts of the story as well. So I do want to get into this question that I ask every guest on the podcast, because the podcast is called But What Do I Know?
Yes.
And so I want to know if you had any but what do I know moments where you were like, but what do I know about this situation? Like I didn't ask for this. I was born into this.
Yes.
But what do I know about how to do the work to get out of this? Or what does that even look like? Or because I think I'm drawn to your story, because I think there's that meme on TikTok where people are like, God, I don't want to be one of your strongest soldiers. And,
right.
And every time I had a guest last year too that had a similar story to yours, where she lost her sister and she went through an intense breakup at the same time. And I just can't fathom like picking the pieces up and just putting one foot in front of the other and stepping. So I'm so curious to know what your but what do I know moments were like and how you got through them, if you have.
Yeah, I think, I love this question, and there are a lot of ways I can go with this. And I don't know that I would say, but what do I know about healing? Because I think what I can say for sure about healing is that it is individual. I can say that it is not something that you generally can initiate. Like you are generally invited to heal. And I think that comes at a time when you have developed some capacity for what that work is going to entail. You probably won't feel ready, but you are prepared. So I think, but what I think the thing that I had a very more stark, visceral reaction to that question was like, well, what do I know about reparenting myself? Like, what do I know about doing the unfinished business of raising myself if I was never shown in the first place? Like, if I don't know what it looks like to actually take care of myself, like, where do I start? And you go about answering that question by listening to yourself. I think more than anything, for me, it was always about, what do I need? What does my soul need? Now, early in my life, I needed money, I needed stability, I needed financial security, and so I was in deep pursuit of the things that would sort of guarantee that. And I think the more that when your basic needs are met, you have a roof over your head and you have food and you have reliable income and once those things are taken care of, then you can start to ask yourself other questions. And I think you can also slow down a little if you let yourself. And so it took me a while to learn how to slow down and to really listen to what that inner child, that wounded person was asking for. And I think trying to figure out how to, I don't know, how do you address the wound? How do you mind it without it running your life? And so how do you put it in its right perspective? And then how do you show up for yourself? So it was little by little. It was allowing my triggers to be information, so when things triggered me, it was like, well, why was that so upsetting? And why was that the reaction that I had? Allowing my desire to be a teacher. And so like if I was really wanting something, not judging that or not feeling, and I don't mean material things necessarily, whether it was just like needing connection or needing to cry or needing a hug or, needing things that I think as a child I was maybe made to feel were weaknesses or things that I shouldn't need, or just they were burdensome because I didn't have a parent who could actually meet those needs. And so, yeah, there is, I think, a big question for a lot of us of like, what do I know about raising myself, or sort of picking up where my parents left off and doing that unfinished work. But I don't know. I think you can, if you can find a way to have enough distance from the wound, you don't have to stay stuck in it to understand it, if that makes sense. And if you can just listen to yourself and not judge what that person, like imagine, if a 7-year-old walked up to you and needed something from you, you're not judging them for what they need, whatever that thing is, you find a way to either satisfy their curiosity, or you feed them, or you clothe them, or you nurture them, whatever they might be looking for. If they're scared, you think about, how do I make them feel less afraid? And, how do I meet them with some tenderness and compassion? And so it's doing that same thing with ourselves ultimately, is where I've landed.
Yeah, no, you said two things that I have mentally just taken a note of, and I'm going to do my best to remember so I can write it down. You said using your trigger as information and desire as a teacher. And I think that's so good. So simple, but so good. Because if you document, okay, I was triggered because of this, why, and that you let yourself use that as like the path to your understanding, and then your desire, your curiosity is kind of guiding you through, I think it becomes a really important, and maybe it kind of makes the healing process a little bit easier on yourself. So those two things are sticking with me.
I'm so glad. I love that. I think that I tend to try to drill down 5 whys. So if I hit, something, I hit a nerve. I mean, now I don't need to generally. I'm quite clear on where something is coming from, like what's activating me or what it's activating in me. And usually I can articulate it for myself really quickly. But sometimes, and I offer this as advice to other people, if you feel like you're getting stuck on something, or you're like, why is this upsetting me? Like, why is this really bothering me? And, to your point, use curiosity to lead you there, not judgment. Then you get that first why, that first answer, and then you might need to go, okay, well, why? And then you get kind of that next layer. Okay, well, why? And you may not need 5, but I think usually by the time you get to 5, you've hit the root of whatever the thing is.
Yeah, no, agreed. That's a really good, by the time you kind of dig, you kind of get close to, if not even hitting the root of, of your question or your curiosity. That's a good point. But yeah, no, I really like that you said that. And I definitely appreciate you sharing that moment. I think one thing I just love, about asking that question to guests, especially when I hear Black women just give their responses, it's either affirming, it's like, no, like hearing you say, no, there are things that I do know about healing. What I now have questions about, and I'm having my, but what do I know moment about, is with regards to reparenting. And girl, that is a big task.
Yes. It is.
It
is, and it's funny because I remember when I first heard the term reparenting many years ago, and I loved that term. And then I started thinking about it even more broadly. And because sometimes I think there's a guilt attached to this idea of reparenting, this idea that your parents didn't do something right, and so you have to redo it. And so I've started really thinking about it a lot more through that lens of doing the unfinished business of raising myself. Because we're always raising ourselves. We're always sort of tending to ourselves. And so it's not to say that you don't need to reparent, because I absolutely, in my case, needed to, I think, learn just fundamental stuff that I was like bumbling. Like, really quick story. I remember in my early 20s, I'd moved to DC for a job. And they paid for my relocation, but there was no like temp housing or anything. I think that I had maybe like 2 nights in a hotel or something because I was, 22 and the job didn't pay very much money. And so I get to DC and I'm on Craigslist. P.S. That's how long ago this was. Although I think they're still around, but I'm on Craigslist looking at apartments. I find an apartment. I go see it. I'd seen a few at that point and I really like this place. And the owner is there and he had just renovated it and all this stuff. And he says, okay, well, here, the deposit will be this amount. Give me the deposit and come back tomorrow for the key. I'm like, great. I give this man pretty much all the money I have for the deposit for this apartment. And I go back the next day to get the key and he was nowhere to be found. I didn't have a lease. I didn't have anything in writing yet. I didn't have a receipt. I didn't have anything. I'm like totally on good faith that I'm going to get this apartment and we're going to sign the lease and I'm going to get the key. And I gave him cash because I don't even think I didn't have a checkbook at the time. It was maybe like with my stuff being moved, and oh my God. And I say that because, it's funny now, but a parent would have taught you. Always get a receipt. Make sure you have a lease. Don't give this man money until you get the key in your hand, kind of a thing. And it's funny. And everything worked out. Well, I'm very lucky that it all worked out. Not with that apartment. I did lose that money. But one of the other apartments that I wound up seeing, I went back to the people and I went with my sob story. I was like sobbing and I was like, this happened to me. And oh my gosh. And the woman it was a woman who owned a row house in DC. It had 4 apartments in it. And she said, okay, I'll give you a lease. And when you get your first paycheck, you can give me the deposit and, your rent and like pay everything when you get your first paycheck or first couple of paychecks or whatever. Cause I probably couldn't even do it all in one paycheck at that time. But, those are the kinds of things that for sure a parent would have taught you. And then beyond such things, we've got to finish the job of raising ourselves and figure out what that looks like.
And of course, for your case, it's more on the extreme side, but even things like the methods in which we were parented, the conversations, the things that you heard, if your parents were parenting you from a place of survival versus comfort, if they were immigrants like myself and, I think there's degrees to this reparenting.
Oh, there's levels to this. Absolutely. That's kind of why this idea of like raising yourself, because you're coming up out of whatever, wherever, whenever, and always. And because, we swallow whole all of those messages that we got from the people that raised us or took care of us or didn't take care of us. Right. And those become our inner voice a lot of time. And so, it's heavy work. It's important work. And not all at once. Like you don't have to do it all at once, but it's definitely ongoing.
Yeah. So one thing I really liked about your book, I just felt like you were very blunt. You were very raw, honest. And there was one thing that I found interesting. So you mentioned in the book that, because of your success and your outward appearance, that when people would see you, they would say things like, your parents must be so proud, or they would sort of craft their own presumed narrative of your life onto you. And so I'm wondering, one, did that annoy you? Did you feel like people were not really taking the time to know you because they just kind of took you at your outwardly appearance, is one? And then I want to know if you purposely did that. Like if you did it as a way, if you focused on your outward appearance and your success as a way to kind of like rewrite or suppress your childhood story. Yeah.
It's such a good question. If you don't mind, I'll flip them and I'll answer the second one first because it started so young. And I think, I will say this. I have always been very meticulous about my appearance. I was that little girl. Like I was very, very young. And I always cared very much about those things. I am sure that it is because I am a Libra sun and a Libra moon with a Virgo in Venus, a Venus in Virgo. So that is very much like my thing. And at my core, a big part of who I am and how I express myself. but I think it became an armor and a shield at the same time, you know? And so it kind of is a double-sided coin. In one way, it was almost like a ritual of self-care, of taking care of myself in the way that I could at that time, which was to look cared for. And I felt cared for because I looked cared for. Now, it definitely served the purpose of when I was going to school, I was trying to eliminate any question of what my home life might look like. And so I wasn't dirty, and my clothes were pressed, and my hair was combed, and, you know, anything that I could do to make sure that I didn't raise suspicion. And because I had good grades and good behavior, it was easier to eliminate any doubt. Right. And so there weren't a lot of reasons for people to look really closely. Now, as an adult, yes, it is an interesting observation, right? That people, when I've shared anything about my background, I get all kinds of questions. You know, the one question is just always some version of, well, how did this happen? You know, there's always kind of this gesture at me of like, well, you don't look like what you've been through. You know, it's kind of what people are saying. And sure, that's a compliment, I guess. But I think, so to answer your question directly, I didn't do it as an adult for any reason other than the fact that that was who I was. But by then, it was all I knew. And I don't know that would have been different with a different home life. It's so hard for me to actually say that I would have had a different stance because I think I'm so wired that way. But I think it was it's always interesting to me because what it reveals is this predisposition to the idea or this presumption that only people who look a certain way, only people who speak a certain way, only people who have the kind of education that I have or the background, you know, that I have professionally could only come from parents, like, you know, who worked really hard and did well and put me in good schools and, you know, helped me get internships or coached me through certain things. And, you know, and I think that's honestly more of what I want people to understand is that it doesn't look like one thing, you know? And so the kid who is going to school, good grades, you know, super buttoned up and they're keeping it all together, they might literally be doing everything they can to keep it together and to hold it together. And you can't assume that everything is okay. You also can't assume that a person who, you know, just because they look like a character that you might identify with, didn't have struggle or didn't, you know, have adversity that because what it's saying is people who come from places like me can't get to where I've gotten, right? That's really what it's saying. It's like, well, you don't look like that. Doesn't make sense. You don't look like that. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to look like? You know? So, yeah, I don't know if that fully answers your question, but I'm like this all the time. Like, you know, you're going to get a version of this like all the time and it's not for anybody but me. But yeah, I'm clear. I became clear when I was like 19 years old that it wasn't intentional, but it became, a friend of mine, long story short, I first told her in college. She was the first person I told about my parents when I was in college. We were on a road trip. And she came from a very, you know, wealthy family and, you know, had gone to the best schools and all of that. And here we are at the same school at the same time. You know, she was a year ahead of me. And I'm telling her about my background. And she looked at me and she was like, I thought you came from money. And that was the first time where I was like, this is what people think about me? Like, this is great. You know, I hadn't said or done anything that would suggest that, you know, I didn't have name brand anything and I didn't have, you know, expensive anything. But I think I looked well cared for. And so, yeah, it's a really kind of bizarre relationship that I have to it because, it is what it is. But also I think it's important that we interrogate the assumptions that we make about people based on something so superficial
That part. And I think, you know what? I think I'm glad to hear that, one, you became Claire at such a young age too, at 19, which is great. And that two, this is just who you are. And I figured as much because I'm like, girl, you always have that shit on and you always look great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to manufacture it, right? I think at some point, it would be exhausting otherwise. So I don't know what it would look like otherwise. But yeah, I think, look, has it been useful professionally? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Has it allowed me to move in spaces where it wasn't on the table, right? So there was never a question of like, did I have the experience or, did I have any special needs, so to speak, right? Being in that room. I removed that doubt, I think, for sure. I wasn't trying to, but I think it's a version of the same thing, looking cared for, whatever that means. And I don't mean, having designer things, which yes, now I do, right? And now I have all the things that I generally will want to have. But it's a similar signal that says that this person is not going to be overly concerned with things that will get in the way of their success or their performance, and I'm putting that in air quotes for your listeners because, ultimately I think so much of success is performative, but that's a different conversation, right? But I could move through the world, this new world, this other world, without raising suspicion about my ability to be there and to thrive.
Mm-hmm. That's real that you said that. And I think it's great that even if you were not doing it on purpose, you understand that there's a certain level of privilege, and I'm using it so loosely because if that's the privilege you had in your situation, girl, that's a drop. But, there's a little bit of an oomph that it gives to allow you to sort of navigate the outside world, when you weren't at home,
It's one less thing to worry about.
Exactly. And girl, you deserve.
Thanks. It's one less thing to worry about. So, but I think it's also why telling my story felt more important. And so I don't mind now when I share it and people are surprised. I can also tell sometimes when people are looking for evidence. They're like scanning. They're trying to figure out. They're like, where is it?
Where the scars at?
Exactly. Like, where is it? It's fascinating. And it says a lot about, where we are as a culture, right? Like if you think about the movie Precious, I remember when that movie came out and it took me years to watch it. But I remember telling somebody about my background and they were like, oh my gosh, that reminds me, some of what you share reminds me of this movie I saw called Precious. And I was like, yeah, but the difference is I was literate and really good in school. And there's a privilege with the way I present.
Yeah.
And those two things could be the difference in a lot of cases, right? And so, I would be disingenuous if I didn't acknowledge that.
Yeah. No, that's real. So I want to dive deeper into, the mother-daughter dynamic and your specific relationship. And like I said, I'm super grateful because I think this is not a dynamic that is spoken about enough. So I'm going to read a page out of your book.
Yeah.
So listeners, we're going to be reading, page 25 out of my own making. And as soon as this book is out, y'all better run to get this book, okay? Because I'm reading it, and I promise you my jaw's been dropped. I have sticky notes. If you're watching the video on YouTube, y'all, there's sticky notes. There's notes. I have a write-in all throughout. But, okay, so I'm going to read page 25. And so it says, I didn't want to remember the night my mother cursed and beat me for telling Grandma that the house had a funny smell when she and her friends were smoking. I was 4 or 5 or 6. I don't want to remember how it felt when the back of her hand struck the side of my face and then the top of my head. The way she grabbed my arm so hard I thought it might release from its socket. Her free hand, open and swift, came down with the weight of her 5'7" frame on my back and bare legs. The whiff of cigarettes on her breath and in her hair, the feral vacancy in her eyes. You don't tell my motherfucking business. Do you hear me? To nobody. I'm the adult. This is my house. I can do what I want. I don't want to remember the first time I thought my mother might kill me. Whew, girl. That one was hard to read.
Thank you. I think, I don't.
Was it hard to write?
I will tell you. Oh my gosh. So let's go from least hard. It was really interesting listening to you just now. I've never heard anybody else read that. So yes, I'm sitting with that. It was really hard to read it when I recorded my audiobook. And it was really, really hard to write it. And I will tell you why. Because as readers will continue on, I'm talking specifically about the stories we tell ourselves. And I was writing that scene on a plane. I was flying between New York and LA. I don't remember which direction. I think it was going to LA. And I'm sitting there and I'm writing. And as I'm writing, I'm remembering the scene I remembered, but I couldn't remember how old I was. But I was like, wait, but my grandmother was still alive. My grandmother passed away when I was 7 years old. And so grandma was still alive because I'd gotten in trouble for telling her that my mom and her friends were smoking weed in the house. And so I was like, in that moment, I kid you not, as I'm writing it, I'm realizing that the story I had been telling myself was that my mom didn't, become this other person until after my grandmother passed away, that it was her death that was the trigger point for my mom's addiction and for her abuse and for the neglect. And I'm sitting here being like, wait a minute, there's no way somebody would behave that way to a child that young, beat me the way that she did if she wasn't already unwell.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a mess because I'm literally trying to tell people about the stories we tell ourselves as I'm realizing a story I have been telling myself this whole time up until I wrote that scene.
Yeah.
And I was bawling. So I'm literally on the plane typing and sobbing and just going through it. Yeah, it's hard. And I think it's hard because it was obviously a very painful memory and experience. And I meant it. I remember feeling like I may not survive being beaten by her at that time. But it was painful. It's hard to write. It was hard to write because I was also reckoning with the truth. There was like this moment of reckoning that I was having in real time as I was getting it on the page.
Yeah. And I think to me, what stood out to me was just hearing the words, I didn't want to remember over and over again. Girl, get a tissue if you need to.
Oh, I have it. It's right here. I just had it was just a
little dab.
Yeah, just a dab.
Yeah, that's how I felt when I was reading it. Just the constant, I didn't want to remember that my mom did this. I didn't want to remember that my mom did that. And I think, man, if you can talk about, does it take work to literally shut out memories so that you can survive? Because that's essentially what you did, is you told your brain, no, mom wasn't like that until grandma passed.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the truth. She was like that all along.
Yeah.
And then now I'm even making the connection as I'm talking to you. That's why your breakdown and breakthrough was based on remembering your grandma's passing. Because I wondered, I'm like, this whole time, why wasn't it like about her mom? But it's your grandma's passing was sort of the window to all of that.
It was a trigger point, and I don't want to give too much away.
Yeah. Yes.
But it's fair, right? That's absolutely true. I think it's tough because the brain does shut down to some extent, right? Like there is a dissociative thing that happens. And I write about dissociation a lot because I think that was I know that was my response. And a lot of children dissociate, in particular, especially when things happen in that time period where memories are still sort of squishy, and, our ability to hold on to a lot of our memories really before the age of 7, it's tenuous at best. And so it's really the things that are lasting and that have a really strong impression on you that we tend to hold on to, right? And so, like, I remember the birthday party when I was 4 years old, and the boy next door blew out my birthday candles, right? And when he did it, he spit on my cake, right? I remember that because I was so upset that he did it. But generally speaking, I don't remember a lot of things that happened, before the age of like 7 years old. But I will tell you, there are things that I will think of now, and I'm like, I could have been 8, I could have been 11, I could have been 12, where I just sort of shut down as a means of survival because the brain can't process what's happening. We don't have the cognitive ability and, the intellectual, the emotional capacity to reckon with what's happening when you're that young. So yeah, it naturally happens. There is a sort of amnesia that happens in all of us in childhood, but then there is a dissociative state that can happen to a lot of people when you've been through early childhood trauma, even later in life. But, particularly when you're early on, it's a very real survival trauma response, but also a survival mechanism, coping mechanism that served me really well, honestly, for a long time. It's just that when you allow yourself to become a witness to your life, like the breadth of it, stuff will come back. The more you remember, the more you remember.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so with that, I did want to kind of ask you a question about that too. If you, kind of can remember, as you were growing up, during your childhood, especially those teenage years, what were your feelings towards your mom? Like, was it pity? Was it anger? Was it everything and anything?
Yeah. I mean, by the time I was a teenager, it was a mix of shame and anger.
Mm.
I would say like the progression for me was fear when I was really young, afraid of her, afraid of what would happen if people found out. That was very much at the core of it. And then when I got old enough to know what shame was and to know that I should feel ashamed that we didn't have a parent who was taking care of us, or that we didn't have food at home, or that, we were collecting welfare and my mom was getting food stamps and she was, spending some of that on drugs. Like, I eventually became really ashamed of that. And I think it was shame both because parents are typically a source of pride when you're a kid. You're like, my dad does this, or my mom does that, or look what my mom taught me how to do, or, whatever it is, right? But we tend to be quite proud of our parents when we're little. And so I didn't have that sense of pride really for her. And then, yeah, by the time I was in high school, I had my sort of emotional range, right, was broad enough for me to make room for anger and to not fully know why I was angry. I just knew that it felt unfair. It felt like this sort of injustice was being done to us, that we just couldn't have a normal, like, or quote, normal life, because my mom was such a mess. And I was angry for a long time. I was angry for a really long time. It showed up in different ways, mostly pointed back towards myself. But yeah, I was really angry. I think the shame lingered for a while, probably as long as I didn't tell people. And I think as I began to talk more about it and make friends that I felt comfortable sharing my background with, and, dating people, and I would, be on dates being like, oh my God, when am I going to tell this guy that I was raised by wolves? It's like, I think once I stopped feeling afraid to talk about it, the shame started to erode a little bit. But I think I felt angry probably well into my 20s, like, probably approaching 30, if I'm honest.
Mm-hmm. So where, I'm not going to spoil the book. So outside of the book, how are you sort of feeling? Like, what are your feelings about where you stand with your relationship with your mom today? Do you feel like you've shed the shame and anger, or it's always just going to be continuous work?
No, I really do. I definitely don't feel shame. And I don't generally feel angry either. Many years ago, I would say maybe 4 or 5 years ago, 4 years ago, I reached a point where I found myself not grieving for what I didn't have, but I was really feeling more grief for the life that she didn't get to have. And that I didn't get to witness this woman become this amazing person, however that took shape for her professionally, but emotionally and, in terms of friendships and connections with people. I didn't get to witness that. And that felt sad. And I really felt sad for her. And it wasn't pity so much as real grief, I think, for what was lost. And, I will just say in recovery, I think is probably a fair way to say it. We've been estranged for many, many years. It's been over 20 years now. And the difficult part about imagining what a future with her looks like is just that she hasn't yet come to a place where she can acknowledge and accept the truth, the reality of what happened. And so I can't live in a virtual reality with her where my childhood didn't happen. And so until we can, I think, have at least alignment on the truth, then for now, we will continue to have the distance that we've had for the last, 22 years. And it's acceptance. I have, I think, long grieved what I didn't get and what I did have as a result. And I've really come to accept that that's a version of my story. That's part of it. And I think my ability to be joyful and to, see the world through a lens of possibility, I think it really comes from having made space for that pain. I think that pain gave way to the joy that I'm able to feel. And I think if I wasn't able to really sit with that and dig into that and look at it and witness it, and know that I won't, I could survive it, right? All those feelings, I don't think I could have gotten here, but it's still sad. I would never say that it's not sad. And some days randomly, it'll be so, I'm 44 years old. And I could be watching a movie, I could see a mother and a daughter out somewhere, and randomly I just feel a wave of sadness, and I allow it, I honor it, and I don't judge it, and I don't go, "Oh, why am I still sad?" You're like, well, girl, because your first love broke your heart, and you will always sort of to some extent be tending to that wound. And it's okay.
Yeah.
It can be sad, and, you can sort of like grieve and celebrate things at the same time. And I think that's whatever those two things are for you, right? But I think we all have to, in a perfect world, we create the capacity to do both. So that's where I am.
When I think, I'm no therapist, but I think that is a balanced, healthy place to be. And that's how the therapy is working, because you said you start to grieve the life that she didn't have.
I know.
But that's grown.
But it hit me out of nowhere. And I was in the middle of a conversation actually with a therapist, and we were talking about something else. And I said, I really mostly feel sad for her. And I heard myself say it. And I was like, oh, well, that must be true then, right? Like, because I really, it came from the most genuine, real place. And yeah, and it was so freeing in a way too, to realize that I had kind of I had graduated to some next level of healing, right? We don't graduate fully, I don't think, but I had gone to a new level, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And it was so honest. And I think I'm still there. When I think about her age and when I see women her age doing things in their lives, and I'm like, oh man, because I do believe it's never too late. But yeah, I think I still will sometimes find myself feeling sad for her in that regard.
Yeah, and that's absolutely okay as you do that work. So reading your book, I sort of discovered a new term that I wasn't familiar with. And it's this process of neuroplasticity.
Yes.
So I want to read again. It's the last one. I want to read a little bit of page 35, and then I want to get into that because it played, a impactful role in your healing journey. And then we'll talk about how you came to understand that word and what it means for you and all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so 35, it says, neuroplasticity holds a promise. The stories we tell ourselves, back to that, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are matter and they can change. These stories, which create a lens through which we view the world, are not fixed. They are mutable and dynamic. They dissolve and reassemble in response to every new space we inhabit, to the people who become our chosen family, to the adventures we pursue, and to the revelatory moments we collect along the way. What we learn, we can unlearn. That's key. This malleability, I believe, is our greatest gift as humans. To find a new path when the ground shifts beneath us is an invitation. To envision a different way forward is to dream. And to continue on after devastating loss is the ultimate test of creativity. To write a new story is how we make magic. That's so cute. That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
That's so beautiful. And so, quick disclaimer for the listeners, we are not brain scientists. We are not health scientists, but, I looked into this as well. And my understanding of neuroplasticity, as you mentioned it on this page, is very much just the lifelong capacity for our brain to continuously just change, rewire itself in response to different stimulations, life experiences, etc. So I want to kind of get into how you even stumbled upon this practice, why it was important enough for you to put it in the book.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. I think I always believed in that. And I felt like my life was such a testament to that concept that nothing is fixed, that it's not, it is the way it is, that idea that things have to be a certain way or that they're predetermined. And I always believed that. I just didn't have language for it. And so when I learned about the term, this was back in 2017. And at that point, I would argue that it had already been in the culture, or at least on the fringes of the culture, for 4 years before that. When I learned about it, it was revelatory because I was like, that's it. That's exactly what it is, right? It explained how a kid like me, right, could become this thing. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly the word that I want to use. And it also, I think, I write that it's a promise because it's a promise that anything else that you do is yours to decide, right? And so the things that you've learned, you can unlearn them if they're not working for you, if they're harming you, if you're feeling stuck in them. And so, it was such a powerful concept to have backed by science, that the brain does not stop growing when we're 25 or 26, that, we don't just arrive at this point in young adulthood and we're there forever. Right. And so, you can do anything to enhance your neuroplasticity, right? And that's everything from saying mantras or affirmations every day that you literally are hearing yourself say out loud, whatever it is. I will say, one of mine, I've been saying this for years now. I trust my magnetism. And I've said it so much that it is such a deeply held conviction that I have. You couldn't tell me otherwise, right? But another example of that is learning a language or learning a sport, or, almost any new experience that you have when you expose your brain to a new way of thinking or doing something, and you continue to give it information that supports that new idea, that new insight, that new experience, that new talent, whatever that you're learning, that new habit that you're cultivating, it will change to go along with the program. And so, God, that's powerful stuff, and I just wanted everybody to know about it. And so when I learned about it, and then I began to learn about epigenetics, and I began to learn about adverse childhood experiences and early childhood development. I mean, and all of this, I would say it was over the course of, within the context of the book, a 4-year period, that I'm learning about and in reflection sharing, what I was learning over those years. And I'd gone on to take a neuroplasticity for business course through MIT and some positive psychology through Stanford, and to really just kind of continue to round out what I'm learning about human potential. And and I think honestly, when I think too about when it was time to write my story, I think when I had this vocabulary and I could tell my story and offer it in a way that wasn't just me talking about my own life, but that it could be the narrative structure to illustrate some of these concepts. And so what does our environment do? And what does it look like to inherit, generational trauma, but also generational wisdom, right? And so, I could keep, you could tell I could keep going, but I'll stop there. But that was really, that term was such an unlock for me, because I was like, there is science that speaks to this. And I started trying to read everything I could and watch all the TED Talks, and clearly eventually take classes and do all the things to just digest it. I think in a way that could feel informed, but mostly I was just fascinated by it. I mean, now I research for lots of reasons now. And so much of it informed my writing, certainly. But yeah, I think it's definitely a part of the way I want to continue to learn about the world and how we choose to exist in it.
Right. And no, I honestly love that you chase, you follow your curiosity, you chase wisdom. Yeah. And I think I had this down in my notes, but I feel like I might almost have the answer to it from what you were saying. I had put on here, how did you sort of use this in conjunction with your therapy practice? But I feel like it's almost, the therapy kind of helps the neuroplasticity as you, in addition to your mantras. But you can kind of speak to
it
that.
Reinforces it. I mean, you got to remember too, I was in therapy for a decade before where the book starts. So, I was 10 years in therapy before the moment where the book even begins. But yeah, it's a reinforcement. And again, I didn't know it at the time, right? Those 10 years before I learned the term were absolutely, I think, neuroplasticity in action in terms of sort of reconciling and putting into context or creating context for my story, rounding it out more fully, having an enlightened witness in a therapist, and then eventually with friends, right? All of those things were me making sense of the story and assigning it a different kind of meaning. And eventually also finding, it's weird to say this, but finding the benefits of what I had been through as well. And, so we're usually doing it when we don't, whether we realize it or not. I think the goal is really to be clear about what that tape is running.
Yeah.
What is the narrative that's running? What is it that you're saying to yourself? And how much of your thoughts are you able to just observe versus they're dictating how you feel about yourself, or they're dictating about, how you feel about your opportunities and your capacity for anything, I think is really what I hope that this is an invitation for people to consider. It's not to say that I am the best, I'm the only poster child for this. We have, fortunately, a lot of, I would say, profiles and possibility, right? Possibility models out there. Unfortunately, I think a lot of times they're very extreme. And so people have a hard time seeing themselves in a story that belongs to someone like Oprah Winfrey, right? For example, but she's a possibility model. She was absolutely one of mine. And so, I think if we can actually find ways, whatever that looks like for you, to reimagine what your future might look like and start to tell yourself a different story about not making up a story, right? But putting your past into perspective, and to the extent that you might need to, because I needed to integrate it into the broader story about your life. You know, my story was always very separate for a long time. And so there was like this other life that happened to this version of me that didn't exist anymore. And in doing that, I was cutting a part of myself off. And so the more that I can make room for that, the more I could tell a story that felt empowering, and I wasn't just running away from it, you know, but it was a part of me in a meaningful and important way.
Yeah. Oof, girl, that is powerful. And I think even as I read that page and I made some notes, and it's funny, I recently recorded an episode too talking about, you know, this year I've had so many episodes about, you know, affirmations and manifestation and stuff like that. But I think this year I need personalized mantras. Like I need to sit down and create my own rather than just the apps or the cards that are like, I'm deserving of happiness. Like mine needs to be like, I'm deserving of the platform that I'm creating, that,
Yes.
you know, so I
Yes.
absolutely will be kind of taking neuroplasticity to heart. I think I'm going to be kind of just understanding it a little bit more and, yeah, applying it to the stories that I'm telling myself. But
Yes.
I am so thankful to you for sharing your journey, firstly in the book, but on this platform. I'm so grateful for you spending your time with us on this episode. I'm going to switch segments up a little bit before we end off. And I like to end things off on a super light note. So I like to ask guests just 4 questions. These are first thing that comes to mind. Let's have some fun and before we end off the episode. So the first one, I'm super curious about this because I've peeped the Instagram feed and you be traveling. So what is one place in the world that you want to visit?
Ooh, just one? Berlin.
Oh, can I ask why?
I've just heard it's a really dope city, and it's not a place that I would necessarily, I don't think, go to without more insight.
Mm-hmm.
But I've heard like just such a dope art culture and, yeah, just a really sort of forward-looking city in a lot of different ways. And I think because it's something that I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards, it's one that I've become more curious about.
Okay, I like that. Okay. If you had to delete all but 3 apps on your phone, what 3 apps would you keep?
Ooh. Duolingo.
Okay.
I'm studying French, and I think I'm up to like 760 something day streak. So I've been doing it a daily for over 2 years. So let's see, Duolingo, Insight Timer.
I have that app too.
It's that.
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Everyone's going to laugh at me for this. Pandora.
Okay. Jewelry girl.
But wait, I have to say why. So because I am young adjacent, Pandora was first. And there was no Spotify, Apple Music. You were just buying singles from Apple Music. They didn't have predictive radio. They didn't have Apple Radio. So when I first got Pandora 100 years ago, of course, like everybody else, I created all the playlists and all the things. And I will argue that it still has the best algorithm for discovery. And so I have discovered so many dope artists through Pandora that I don't think I would have found any. And I've tried them all. I have tried Spotify. I have tried Apple Radio, and they don't touch it.
Okay. I am mistaken. I apologize because when you said Pandora, my mind went to jewelry.
No.
So that's why I was like, jewelry girl? We could do that on a website.
I am a jewelry girl, just not a Pandora jewelry girl.
Got you.
Yeah.
Okay, I will have to check out Pandora, like the music app. I'll have to look into it though now. Okay, so you said, so it's Duolingo, Insight Timer, and Pandora. That's a solid 3.
Yeah, because it's like my language learning, my meditation, and my music.
Yeah, I like it. Solid. Yeah. Okay, what TV show or movie has you hooked currently?
Oh my God. Paradise on Hulu.
Is that the one with Sterling?
Yeah, Sterling K. Brown and James Marsden star in the show called Paradise. And it is this post-apocalyptic story about, basically what happens at the end of the world and all these people who were chosen to move to this underground city, this secret underground city. And yeah, it is so good. Sterling K. Brown is amazing in everything. So let's just start there. And frankly, so is James Marsden. But yeah, it's so good right now. The acting is phenomenal. And I love a good mystery whodunit sort of. And I love the post-apocalypse. It kind of has all the things. It's so good.
I have to check it out. I've seen I think you're the fifth or sixth person to talk about how good that show is. So I will get on it. It's on Hulu, right?
It's on Hulu. And I will say I'm cheating, but the other show that has me hooked is Severance.
Also heard about that one. That one's on Apple TV. See,
yes.
I need the subscriptions to get together.
It's really hard to choose between those two because those are the two shows where I immediately am texting friends did you see that? Oh my God.
Yeah. Okay, great. Okay, Severance and Paradise they're going on my list. We're gonna binge this weekend.
Must watch. Ooh.
And I added this one because I know that you're a fashion and beauty girl, both in your work and in your personal style. So what is your go-to fashion piece and beauty item?
Wait, fashion piece and beauty item?
Yeah, so fashion piece, piece of article of clothing, shoe, whatever fashion piece that you're I need this. This has to go with any outfit.
If I want to make an outfit different or I want to add something to it, I tend to go to a scarf. I love Hermes scarves in particular, but I love a silk scarf or a cashmere scarf or shawl. It's probably one of the things that I would grab. I love a third piece. So I also, a blazer is always going to be, that's probably the real answer. I would say fashion item, would be blazer. Accessory would be a scarf. And beauty product. Wait, do you want brand or product or?
Product.
That's hard. I think if I had nothing on my face, I would still do my brows. If you can't, I mean, I'm a brow girl.
I could tell. Do you get them laminated or you just do you kind of pencil, gel? What are we doing?
I don't gel them. This is literally, I brush them up so that they're fluffy. I trim them as I need to. I don't even really tweeze them. I don't get them waxed. I don't get them done professionally. I tint them.
Okay.
So that's technically a quasi beauty product because, fun fact, I actually use Just for Men mustache and beard to tint my eyebrows. I have for years. And so, yeah, it would be, I tint my brows so that they're darker and I don't need a pencil as much, but it would be brow if I had to choose a pencil. Otherwise, if my brows are tinted, mascara.
Ooh, yes. Mascara makes a difference too. Yeah. When the lashes are just a little bit bolder, I feel like I'm bolder.
A little something. Yeah. Even if you don't have liner, even if you don't have, a lash and a brow, you've already started something.
Mm-hmm.
You can go from there.
Yeah. That's a nice vacay look too when you have your brows tinted and then you do your falsies or your lashes. Oh. Done.
Yes. And maybe you do a lip balm. Yeah. Maybe you do a little bit of a concealer, but you don't need much.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So can you tell? I could talk about this all day.
That's why I put that question in there.
It's neuroplasticity and beauty products. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you so much.
We're multifaceted over here.
As we should be. Oh man. Gosh. But no, thank you so much for answering those questions. Those are all the questions I have for you, Daria. But thank you so much again for taking the time. Before we end off, just please go ahead and share your socials with people, how they can connect with you and find links to your book, both in the States and Canada. We have listeners primarily in both. So just share, how people can connect with you.
Yes, of course. Thank you again for having me. And for anyone watching or listening, you can find me at Daria Burke on all the socials. most of the socials where I'm active, particularly Instagram, LinkedIn, where I publish a newsletter called The Power of Possibility. And my website is dariaburke.com. And you can find out more about Of My Own Making on any of those surfaces.
Okay. And your website is cute.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really
Thank
liked
you.
it.
It's designed by a gorgeous, amazing Black woman named Kia Dyson, and her company is called Golden Launch Creative.
Okay, girl.
Phenomenal.
We'll talk. We'll talk
Yeah.
offline.
Yeah.
But all right. Thank you so much, Daria, for being on the podcast again. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, y'all. So with that, we are at the end of this podcast episode. Thank y'all for listening to my conversation with Daria as we talked about, just her journey through her childhood, the ups and the downs to get to where she is today. I am so grateful, for her just sharing her time and her story with us, firstly through the book format and then even just being on the podcast. So if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you go and support her. Buy the book Of My Own Making. The link, of course, is in this episode description. Continue this conversation on socials, on our Instagram at BWDIK Podcast, as well as in our Discord community. And be sure to share this with a girlie you feel like would love this conversation or could really use this episode right now. And as always, stay well, mind your business, drink your water, and y'all will hear from me in 2 weeks. Bye for now.